Star Wars: The Life and Legend of Obi-Wan Kenobi by Ryder Windham. Prologue. Luke Skywalker was surprised to see the moisture evaporator standing beside Ben Kenobi's abandoned hut on Tatooine. Given that over 3 years had transpired since Ben left the desert planet, Luke had assumed the evaporator would be long gone, scavenged by the Jawas or Sand People. Incredibly, both the evaporator and Ben's hut appeared to be in good shape. The sun-bleached dwelling hugged a remote, stony bluff in the Jedlan Waste, with a sweeping view of the western Dune Sea. Luke had landed his X-Wing starfighter nearby, and was eager to get out from under Tatooine's blazing twin suns. But as he trudged across the rocky ground and drew closer to the plasteel door that was the entrance to Kenobi's hut, he sensed a strange tension in the air. It reminded him of the disturbing sensation he had felt on Dagobah at the cave, that was so strong with the dark side of the Force. But while that cave had radiated cold and death and seemed to challenge and beckon Luke to enter, this was an entirely different feeling, as if the entire property was saying, "Go away." However, Luke also sensed that the message was not for him. He wondered if Ben had used the Force to protect his home, and figured he'd find out soon enough. The plasteel door was unlocked. Luke slid it open and stepped inside. The air was musty, but the shadowy interior offered at least some relief from the heat. Looking around at the various relics that rested on small tables and shelves, and the animal pelts stretched out on the semicircular couch that also served as Ben's bed, Luke couldn't see that anything had been damaged or stolen. The only obvious evidence of Ben's absence was the thin dusting of sand that covered everything. Luke moved into a small living area where he found a vacuum-sealed chest on the floor beside a structural column. It was from this chest that Ben had extracted Luke's first lightsaber, the same lightsaber that Ben claimed had previously belonged to Luke's father. Luke brushed the sand from the chest lid, then lifted it and looked inside. It was empty. Luke sighed. He hadn't expected the chest to contain a second lightsaber, but he had hoped to find something useful. If not a data tape or a holographic recording, at least some kind of clue that might answer the questions that had been gnawing at him for months, ever since his duel with Darth Vader on Cloud City. As he thought of that devastating encounter, which had cost him not only his inherited weapon but his right hand, he suddenly felt an aching sensation at his wrist. "Phantom limb pain," he recalled. That was the term that the medical droid had used to describe the occasional ache that Luke might feel from time to time. Luke flexed the lifelike mechanical fingers of the prosthetic hand that the droid had so carefully attached to the end of his right arm. Veins, muscles, and bones had been replaced with wires, pistons, and metal, and sensory impulse lines even made his cybernetic fingers touch-sensitive. Despite the fact that Luke's original right hand had been lost in the reactor shaft at Cloud City, the medical droid, an expert with highly specialized techniques of genetic reconstruction, had replicated a perfect synthetic duplicate right down to the fingerprints. But the medical droid couldn't do anything about the phantom pain. Luke would have to live with that. He continued his inspection of Ben's home. It didn't take long to find the trapdoor in the floor that led to a cellar. A short series of steps hewn from bedrock descended into darkness. Luke pulled a small glow rod from his belt, activated its light, and climbed down the steps. The cellar wasn't entirely dark, as a scant, eerie light emanated from luminescent stones that was set in one wall. Ben had used the cellar for food and water storage, and a small variety of dried fruits, vegetables, and meats, all of which now looked like collapsed bits of leather, remained strung to a metal pipe that traveled to a cistern. Luke also found a workbench that had been constructed from scrap metal. Tools were neatly arranged on shelves, for a few select tools rested on the workbench, as if waiting for their owner's return. Then Luke spotted the box. It was intricately carved bowwood box, resting on the floor between the workbench and small auxiliary generator. Luke was moving the glow rod closer to the box when a sudden sound came from above. Thud! In a swift, fluid motion, Luke spun to his left as he reached for the blast that was holstered at his right hip, and then sprang back towards the cellar steps. He brought his blaster up fast so that its barrel was angled up through the open trapdoor. An instant later, the air was filled with a panicked electronic shriek. The shriek came from the domed head of Luke's astromech droid, R2-D2, who had traveled with him and helped to evade the Imperial blockade around Tatooine. The startled droid unleashed a flurry of angry beeps as he peered down at Luke. Then he stomped his treads at the edge of the trapdoor's opening, kicking up the layer of sand that rested on the floor of the upper room. "Sorry, R2," Luke said as he lowered his blaster. "Guess I'm a little jumpy." As he returned his weapon to its holster, he muttered, "I'll probably stay that way until I find Han." Luke's throat was already dry from the desert heat, but as he said Han's name, he felt as if he might choke. He had no idea where his friend Han was, only that the armored bounty hunter Boba Fett had taken Han's carbonite-frozen body from Cloud City. Various reports confirmed that Boba Fett intended to deliver Han to the Tatooine-based gangster Jabba the Hutt. But so far, Boba Fett was a no-show. It was Luke's other friend, the Alliance leader, Princess Leia Organa, who had instructed him to hide out on Tatooine and wait for some sign of Han. Unfortunately, Luke had never been very good at waiting. From above, R2-D2 emitted a series of soft electric beeps and a short whistle. Recognizing the whistle's lilt as a concerned question from the droid, Luke replied, "I'm fine, R2. Go make sure the X-Wing camouflage net is secured, and I'll be up in a few minutes." R2 chirped a hesitant response, but then his motor whined and he backed away from the trapdoor.